right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Speed Up and Get Your Hits. It has been a minute. I haven't had anything super crucial to talk about lately, and we have all been busy on the road. As you can see, Nick's not here with us tonight. He wasn't able to make it because we've just all been on the road teaching, and it's hard to get schedules to align. But we wanted to crank out an episode because we've got some pretty cool stuff to talk about. Before we get to that, my name is Billy with SpecTrain. As always, I have Brennan from Gateway Defense with me, and we have a special guest tonight, Kurt McKenna. You may know him as competition shooting analytics on the gram, and as one of the math guys behind the classifier committee on the committee with me. Kurt, we don't waste a whole lot of time going like, so when was the first time you shot around here on the podcast? But let it be known, Kurt's a super smart guy, and PCC GM and a shooter as well. So he'll be hopefully correcting me on anything dumb I say about the math behind the, the classification system.
Maybe
once we get to that. But welcome, man. Thanks for coming on. As always, man, we like to start with the primary thing. We're gonna get to the classifier stuff, but man, getting better at shooting, that's the main thing we talk about around here. So we'll just do a quick update. It's been a minute. Brennan, what you been working on, man? What's the latest on training? What you been up to?
Oh, since the last time we recorded, a shit ton, of course. But
yeah.
So this season last season I kind of hit majors pretty hard, shot a bunch more than I ever did before. This year will kind of be the same thing. So with the weather warming up everywhere and stuff, like that's kind of on my mind right now. So we've got South Carolina section. Billy, I think you said maybe you're going to even throw this up this week. So we've got that upcoming as the time of the recording, like 3 days from now. So preparing for that, doing a lot of work execution mode. I spent a lot of my last few months kind of working a bunch of speed mode stuff. I was not happy with my just raw time on stages and things like that. Some interesting stuff. Listeners of the show will know, Billy and I have both trained with Eric Bell a few times, big with the hit factor math and the rules and all of those things. Won't get into that super deep, but that has been something that has been a little bit of a mental block for me lately. And so that's something that I've kind of pushed past. Mental block meaning, let's say I've got a stage and let's say the goal is to maybe only, drop 2 Charlies on the stage. What will happen is I will start shooting. Maybe I miss my grip off the draw or something like that. I go alpha Charlie on an open target, and that Charlie I would call like a stupid Charlie, right? Because it shouldn't be there. There's no reason for it, and someone else will collect an alpha just as fast, right? So I call those stupid Charlies. Throw a stupid Charlie, and then immediately I start thinking, okay, I only have 1 left, so now I'm going to start shooting everything really slow. And like screw up, right? So that tends to just slow everything down, the movement, the transitions, the shooting, the confirmation levels, everything. So what I've been trying to do is really kind of plan that out, also give myself a buffer for, hey, an extra Charlie or 2 is not a bad mistake. Deltas, mics, and penalties are. Plan that out carefully, and then as I get to the shooting part, once the timer goes off, erase that from my mind and shoot every target the way I would, with the appropriate amount of aggression. And that has been helping me a lot. Like I'm seeing big gains, even just static arrays, dealing with targets, with my target transitions and confirmation levels, and then also just getting from position to position with a lot of confidence. And it's funny because I'm not really changing the way that I shoot or know how to shoot, but it's just a very, very small mental thing that I've switched, and it changes the way that I look at stages. And I mean, we're talking maybe 2 seconds off of stage runs sometimes, just thinking about it the right way. And I was afraid to throw away points for a long time, but that's not been the case. The points are still there, 2 to 4 Charlies maybe on a stage, which is great. But giving myself that buffer of, hey, you could throw 2 or 3 more Charlies than maybe the rules allow, has opened that up for me, to just kind of allow myself permission to go fast,
Right.
And not revert back to turtle mode.
Yeah. So good, man. Yeah, it's tough. The Eric formulas, man. There's definitely value there for sure. I think a lot of us have seen that. It's tricky. It's one of those things where the way he articulates it, I think, can be interpreted a bunch of different ways in terms of how you approach a stage.
Yep.
To me, it's like, it can be a helpful framework to think about during your stage plan, but all it really does is inform the plan. Hey,
Yes.
what targets am I going to shoot on the move? What confirmation levels am I going to use in these targets, right? Based upon, how many of those Charlies can I give up on this stage, right? Based on the math, that kind of thing. From there, you just, like you said, you have to just shoot the stage, right? You can't
Yep.
you can't be doing the math in the middle of your stage run after you make a mistake and that kind of stuff, right? So,
Right.
yeah, working that system out is huge. It's funny for me. It's training with Eric as well. Something I've been doing is like kind of maybe counterintuitive. I think a lot of us leave that kind of training and just default to what people think of as super difficult. Courses of fire and like targets in a lot of the training. All the partials. That are like way smaller than even legal. All the distance, that kind of thing. Like man, like anything else. First of all, that's all you do in your training. Eventually, that becomes easy stuff, and the other stuff becomes hard, right? And so you got to be balanced. But also, it's like there's really no actual difficult shooting in this sport for the most part. Like, I mean, maybe
Right.
except for like nationals, most matches you go to are set up to where like a B class shooter can come onto the stage and in like if they weren't rushing, if they were like in slow fire, can make all the shots, no problem, right?
Yep.
So there's actually no difficult shooting. It only becomes difficult when you start hurrying, right, getting in a rush. But man, so once you discard that, in my mind, all targets in that framework are equally difficult if you're holding yourself to a high enough standard. Like yeah, stopping the dot in the middle on that 25-yard partial and pressing the trigger without moving the gun is difficult, but it's equally difficult to shooting a 5-yard open target properly, right? If you're trying to
Yeah.
do, that sub 25 split to that target and throw in a sub 15 split on it, man, it's like okay, that's equally difficult to shooting that 25-yard target carefully.
Yep.
It's just, are you holding yourself to a high enough standard? And so, man, for me, it's been like, okay, I'm gonna start throwing in a bunch more like actual easy, open close stuff, and
Hmm.
try to hold myself to the standard of shooting it properly quickly, but still getting all alphas on those because like you really can't afford to be giving up points on targets that are that low difficulty. So it's been an interesting shift for me the last couple weeks, trying to emphasize a bunch of that some more, but it's been good.
Yeah, and I think for the guys who like it's been pretty popular, like you're saying, to be setting up the very very difficult stages and the crazy partials and all those things. Like that can severely impact the hit factor math as well. Like
Hmm.
if you give yourself a target that where like the delta is the only thing that you could reasonably shoot without like benching your gun or something like that. I mean, like that is 100% going to impact the math. Like there, you just threw away 8 points because you took 2 delta on a target. Maybe you got lucky and got Charlie delta, right?
Right.
And so I think as well, like that needs to be looked at as skill dev, right? Skill
Hmm.
development. Like really, if you really want to shoot stages and work on the consistency development, you've got to maybe look at setting up some more reasonable looking stages, stuff that you might see in a major, things 6, 8, 10 hit factor, right? Something like that, not something that's wildly low like a 3 hit factor, something like that. Generally we don't see much of that, right? So
Yep.
setting that up and
100%.
holding yourself accountable is very valuable. Mix it up.
Yep. It's good. Got
Yeah.
anything, Kurt? You've been doing rifle things, or you been working on anything interesting lately?
Um, yeah. So I mean, interesting points there, but yeah. So like basically for me, the whole like last year and a half, I've been focusing kind of heavily on supporting local clubs
Okay.
and helping run matches and everything. So that
Nice.
being said, my a lot of my shooting has like kind of regressed
Yeah.
because I haven't been focusing on like my own skill set, right?
Yeah.
Um, but recently I have been like trying to like kind of up my own game. Because I have been kind of disappointed, especially as a GM. Like barely being able to shoot kind of a level at a match is kind of embarrassing, right?
Sure.
Um, so uh, there's like a few major things I've been working on. Like for me, especially locally, I'm very sort of like infamous as being able to shoot really fast, especially with a PCC, being able to do really fast splits, makeup shots. When you have a super large mag, we don't really have to worry about you know don't really have to worry about reloads or anything like that.
Right.
It's really easy to get away with. Oh well, I can see my like call my shots really well,
Mm-hmm.
and don't have to be respectful of the shots. I can just hose the targets and move on. Um, and that's I've been holding myself really accountable to that lately. And it's funny because a lot of people don't recognize that because they kind of know me for what I'm famous for,
Right.
or infamous for, right? But like actually trying to get scoring high alphas, and not just hosing targets and making them up, but doing that and getting that on the first time. One thing that's really interesting with PCCs and with rifles in general is like even though it is the 3 pointed contact, like because it does make it so like the aiming and the recoil is a bit easier than pistol, but also because it is fixed to your face, the optics and the sighting system is fixed to your face. It's a lot harder to drive the actual sighting system to what you want to lead your aiming to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being target focused and actually looking specifically to where you want on the target, and then bringing the optic to that is a lot more difficult with a rifle than it is with a pistol,
Right.
right? Because with a pistol you can just look and then kind of your hands follow into where you're looking, whereas when you've got on a rifle, you're kind of just perpetually looking through the glass. And so like for me, it's I get I always notice I'll get stuck where I'm like looking at the C zone and like shooting shots, and I'm like trying to like drag it into the A, and I'm like can like feel myself like kind of working against myself, and that's
Yeah.
something I noticed that a lot. Then the other thing too, just in general, I think it's something we always all got to work on is that those entries and exits, right? Because like especially with the PCC, I can hammer 15 splits no problem. But and even like transitions, I can do sub 20 transitions for easier, shorter range targets. But if I'm taking 25, 30 splits when I'm doing entries and exits, I'm giving up so much time on
Yeah.
when I don't have to. And that's that's really right now where, as far as time wise, where I need to work on is uh, giving up time or not giving up time on entries and exits on all sorts of positions.
Yeah, so you hit a couple of like super interesting things there to me. Like the
Yeah,
rifle conversation is always fascinating, right? You hear all the time about how easy rifle shooting is, and it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, if you're, if all you're ever doing is that like stand and deliver shooting, where there's no movement involved and there's no reloads, and you're just going to be fast and accurate at the same distances that you normally shoot your pistol, then yes, shooting a rifle is easier for sure, 100%. But man, yeah, there's some things about that rifle shooting. You start trying to run and gun that are actually like pretty uniquely challenging. Shooting on the move being one of them for sure. Um, but yeah, but also again, that's that standard thing. It's like for me, yeah, guess what? I'm doing the standard deliver stuff. I'm not gonna sit here and do 10-yard doubles like you might with a pistol. Like I'm doing those at 50, right? I can try doing
yeah,
that like predictive doubles at 50 and keep them all in the alpha and tell me about how easy shooting a rifle is again, right?
yeah,
So it's just like the standards just have to be adjusted. But yeah, those makeup shot thing is super interesting. It's something I've been playing around with the PCC as well. It's like interestingly to me, like when you have unlimited ammo, makeup shots can almost become a strategy, like that you can
yeah. Oh
use like
yeah,
on purpose sometimes. Like, hey man, like yeah, I really need to shoot this target on the move, like almost at a run, like while I'm walking very fast. And it would almost be faster just to throw three at it than to like try to sit here and be super careful as the rifle's bouncing all over the place,
yeah.
which you would just never even think to like intentionally like consider makeup shots as an option. Um, you know, as
Well, and like
I say lower cap divisions, even like for those of us that have 20, 22 rounds or whatever, like you're still being careful at that point with your ammo a lot of the time. So it's a whole different deal for sure.
yeah, and like on that point, like one common strategy I do a lot is like not necessarily intentionally shooting threes
Hmm.
or fours for that matter, but just
Yeah.
shooting at the splits that I can shoot at
Right.
and calling the shots. And like if I see that during the recoil or whatever that the second follow up shot didn't land in the
Yeah.
A, then I'll just make the third shot
Right.
and not even think twice about it. And so like everyone else watching are like, oh wow, you just like shot this ridiculous burst,
Hmm.
and did you even know what you were doing? I was like, yeah, I saw two alphas and the Charlie over here.
Right.
And I'm thinking that fast, and like even like subconsciously I might not have even thought like, oh, that was a Charlie, you need to make it up. But
You just know.
sorry, not consciously I'm not thinking that, but subconsciously, yeah, I recognize that and make it
Yeah, but
happen.
you
But
did it on
that's
purpose, though.
yeah, it's
Right.
on
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's not like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm just hosing three at the target. Yeah.
Yeah, on that 10 hint factor stage where a Charlie is worth zero point 0.2, like it's way easier to have that
Yeah.
makeup make sense on a PCC than
Yeah.
in, production, right? Like like
Oh yeah.
you can make up those Charlies, super super quick behind the rifle, like you said, as long as you're actually processing fast enough and actually calling
Yeah.
stuff.
Right.
Cool, man. That's
Right.
good stuff. Well, we've without further ado, maybe we should get to the main topic for tonight, which is the classification system. We talked a lot on the podcast about obviously competition and using competition as a tool to help you get better at shooting and all the resources that shooting competitively has in general. And specifically, most of us, on this podcast shoot USPSA. That's kind of our main thing that we use. And one of the unique things about USPSA is the classification system. If you're not aware, pretty close to the beginning of this year, I guess. I guess maybe actually in December of last year, a new committee was formed by USPSA. Kurt and I are both on it. That's kind of responsible for updating and modernizing and improving and maintaining of the classification system. And so there's some big changes that have kind of been announced that are coming down the pike. But I think there are maybe some misinformation out there, if you will, some false assumptions about kind of how things are going to work. Obviously, a lot of questions from folks about how it's going to work. And so we wanted to kind of go through some of the big changes that are going to happen and address some of those questions and hopefully put some fears to rest and so forth, and kind of just update folks on what's happening with the classification system. One of the things I thought we'd start with that I think is missing from a lot of the conversation is like, okay, first of all, why though? Like, why does the classification system even exist? Is it even important? Like, you'll hear all the time, hey man, like, class doesn't matter. All it matters is how you do it matches and so forth. And it's like, okay, fair enough. Yep, match performance, super super important. Everyone on this show tonight certainly shoots majors. And cares about that kind of thing for sure. But what is the utility, or what kind of is the role of the classification system, and does it even matter? Thoughts, fellas? What do we think?
Yeah, I would say like personally. So I kind of invested heavily in locals. Both with supporting it and just like shooting a lot of locals. And I haven't shot a lot of majors personally.
Okay,
I've kind of always been sort of local guy.
sure,
But I do enjoy majors.
yeah,
So like for me, like the kind of that local sphere of like the classification system has always had some value in a sense of, kind of your average Joe can show up and shoot some standard stages and get some sort of measure of what their skill level is, and can see, as they shoot more and more standard stages over time, can see their progression of skill
mm,
over time. And it's a very clear, defined, measured skill that they can measure it against, right? How many
yeah.
times can I say the word measured, right?
That kind of is what it does. Yeah, measurement's
Yeah,
kind of important,
yeah,
huh?
right. And that's really kind of what I see it as, right? It's not like I know a lot of us competitors that have been around USPSA for a long time then we do shoot majors and all that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We start to see things a bit differently, right? But like the average person that shows up on a weekday, or like even somebody who's interested in USPSA, like thinks of it completely differently. And that's kind of like an important thing to realize, like for us that shoot you know 20 matches a month and go to 5 majors a year, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Anyway,
great, man. It's,
thing.
and like you said, everyone's context a little bit different. Obviously, when you're trying to get better at shooting, one of the there's some great things about shooting even your local matches. Hopefully, you're getting a chance to shoot with people that are better than you. But man, a huge part of it is it's an assessment, right? It really kind of exposes. Hey, I always say that your match is the best cold start ever devised in your training, right? It's a kind of a random test of skills that you get one chance to do well on, and you see, hey, where am I at? And hopefully you'll see some things you're doing okay on or doing pretty good, but you're almost certainly going to see some things where you're like, man, that could really use some improvement. This is what I need to go work on this week in my training. What I've become more and more aware of recently is that the experience there is very different depending on what part of the country you might be in. Where
Mhm.
I'm at, Brennan's familiar with this area. Man, here in Charlotte, you show up to our the Charlotte Thursday night, 2 squad indoor match in the area. Like, there's a really good chance there's going to be like 2 state champion GMs there. And just a bunch of other like really high level shooters are squared away, right? So when you go to that kind of a match, in this area, like, yeah, you can just look at your percentage and use that as an assessment of how you did at the match for sure. It's funny though, in my like practice squad thing that I do, I spend a lot of time every week, reviewing match footage and scores from folks across the country. I mean, you'll see folks out in the Midwest, whatever, going to their like the biggest local match in their area for the month, and it's like there is nobody above B class at this match.
Mhm.
Nobody, right? And it's like, okay, if you're winning that match, like, that's cool and all, but it doesn't really tell you anything, right? When you're trying to get better, like, it's not much of an assessment. But man, for that one stage at least per match, to your point, Kurt, you get a measurement, right? You get an assessment of like, hey, ideally, theoretically, against a national level of talent, how am I doing? And you can use that to get that assessment, to get that measurement of where you're at. You can use it to sort of track your progression over time, and you can even use it for goal setting. All of which is super important, right? As you want to progress and get better at shooting. So certainly, it's especially when I first started, chasing those classifiers, that was certainly a big motivating factor for me, getting better and putting that work in. And I think it has been for a bunch of folks that I talked to from across the country as well. So I think it can be a super valuable tool for folks, to shoot sort of at the national level, if you will, even at your local weekly match. So
Yeah.
hopefully that makes sense to folks, and they see the value in it, and kind of appreciate the system, and can make use of it. But obviously, for all that to work and make sense, it has to actually work, and
Yeah.
to work well. And so that's hopefully some of the changes that are coming down the pike
Yeah.
are going to help with that piece as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I see like people chasing that carrot, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
going for the next level, going from B to A,
Yep.
A to M, right? Like that it's a game within in the game, right? Like,
Mhm.
obviously, there's ways to game the system, or at least there has been. Um, but it's a huge thing that people are proud of, right? Like, even people that dog on the classification system, that say, oh, it doesn't matter, like, we don't care, it's only nationals matter. Well, when those people finally make M or finally make GM, like, they're super happy when they do. Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
they're not like, oh, I don't care, like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that's exactly right.
they still do. They still
Yeah.
Yep.
care. So, like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, most of the people that love to talk crap about how making GM doesn't matter have been hard stuck in M class for a long time, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
it's a thing for sure.
Yep. Or have been GMs forever. Like,
Or that, right? Yeah,
Yep.
sure. Yeah.
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 So to the point that you brought up, Billy, about like the majors versus like major match performance versus classifiers, right? I think this is very, very important. So I agree with what you guys are saying. Like, I think that the classification system gives people something to work for. It regardless of how you get there, right? You end up putting in more effort, more work. For some people, maybe it's shooting things over and over again, right? For some people, maybe it's an encouragement to like, oh, I'm going to actually go hit the range and develop my skill so that I am a better shooter, so I can do this level on demand, right? That's certainly the way I saw it when I first started. I was like, this is very interesting. The first time I ever shot classifiers, I was around a B class level in open. So maybe it was like an A class level, right? And I was like, yeah, this is very interesting that I'm essentially shooting around like 70 to 80% of like a GM, and he would be able to do this repeatedly on a consistent level. And it was like, okay, that's very interesting that I could measure myself with a percentage and compare myself to another shooter. And when I first started shooting USPSA, I was certainly not going to a lot of majors. I mean, I think my first couple of years, I only maybe did maybe one major the second year, and maybe 2 majors the year after that. So not very much. And for some people, they don't even do that much, right? Versus this year, I think I'm shooting like 8 or 9, right? I think for a lot of folks, like at a lower classification level, let's say your average, B or C class shooter at your local club, they might not find a lot of value in going to a major or going to nationals or going to area 6 or whatever it is to see how they stack up against freaking Christian Seiler, right? Because they're like, well, I know I'm 60% of that dude, right? Like it's
Yeah.
pretty easy, and so like maybe they don't that's not something that's super enjoyable for them or not worth the money to do, versus I think aspiring A class or M class or certainly other GMs, they're like, yeah, I want to go try to take this title from this guy, or I want to go win M class, which is maybe going to put me in the top 10% potentially of the match and all of these things. And so there's maybe some more attainable goals you might be a little bit more proud of. So I think at a certain skill level, when you get to a certain point, wherever that is, and depending on how competitive you are, that's when majors really start to matter. But like no one, I don't know anybody who is like B class that is like trying to compare their performance as a B class shooter to everybody else at majors like all the time. Like people are looking at the top 10%, maybe at a really big match, the top 15%, right? Like I think a lot of M guys are very competitive and making strides, but beyond that, it's I don't know. It's just you're there to just kind of shoot a fun match. It's a great time, but I don't know that there's a lot that we're necessarily trying to accomplish at those lower levels. And so I think that the classification system and classifiers at locals gives us that thing that we can push for, and almost gets us to that level to where now being competitive at majors is even, in the picture.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I have a pretty similar perspective. I don't talk about it a whole lot because people get mad at you. But yeah, I never shot a major before, making M class. Just didn't really have, certain really until I started like winning locals. I was like, man, what's the point? Like you said, I'm not going to go to there and spend the money and everything else. Spend at the time thinking like, man, it's going to cost me like 5 cases of ammo to go shoot this match. It's like that's a lot of practice I could get in.
Yeah.
To, like you said, to learn something that I already know. Like I'm
Yeah.
not to the point where I'm going to get a better assessment of my skills at a major versus I do at my local match.
Yes.
Right? If what you really are interested in is getting good at shooting, like I think that's totally fair. If you want to go because it's fun and you want to hang out with your buddies and you're actually excited about winning C class, that's cool. But like to your point, yeah, the value proposition there is definitely different, for sure. So classification system for that I think is has a lot of value for folks that want to kind of help get that assessment, particularly if you're not even in this area, right? If there where there's a lot of good shooters, there may not be good shooters in your division.
Correct.
So even if you're showing up to the match where I'm at, or some of the other like local GMs in my area are at, like you're only getting so much information when you're a revolver shooter.
Yeah.
That overall percentage, because like your overall percentage compared to say me and carry optics is going to sway significantly from match to match depending on that match design, like how much the reloads screw you, as an example. Like so your overall percentage is going to swing pretty heavily from match to match, just based on the division differences, much more so maybe even than like your skills are changing. So it's like really hard to get that. But again, at least in that on that one stage per match, you can get a decent assessment of how you're doing and track progression and so forth.
Yeah, because like I know even at my local club, I mean, there's the last match I shot, there's a PCC GM there. I think he had not a super great night or whatever, right? But like when I shoot against him, like I try to beat him, right? Like because I don't see that he has a lot of advantage on the little indoor matches that we're shooting with a rifle necessarily. And he doesn't necessarily split that gun, much faster than me, right? And there's some negatives to the stages as well, like with the movement and stuff like that. And so I look at that and I go, but I know he's always going to put up a very competitive time. So that's kind of a good benchmark for me. But like I can see that now based off of a lot of data from a lot of matches and shooting against a lot of people and being able to say, like, here's how I do against Eric Graffel and Christian Seiler and JJ and Brantley and all these guys. And so I have data for that. But if you aren't getting out beyond that, like it can be hard to compare that and go, all right, well, there's one PCC GM, but I shoot carry optics. So how does that compare? It's very, very hard to tell until you kind of take a look at the classifications. And I think for the most part, Bill, you pointed this out long ago, and I think you're 100% right. Like GMs are not winning matches, right? It's like when you look at the scores, it's G's and M's and A's and B's in that order, pretty much. And so obviously that's there's some accuracy to that.
Right. So
Yeah,
like that
you go ahead.
kind of brings us into like why are we updating things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly, even within the existing system, it is reasonably accurate, right? Because as the cards lie, the GMs beat the M's on average, beat the A's, beat the B's, right? Like that's pretty bog standard. So the question is, I guess, why are we even updating things?
Which first of all, it's kind of shocking to me how well the existing system does actually work. Like
Yeah.
if you just explain to someone how the current system works and the fact that like every year there's a different system for setting height factors and stuff like that, you'd be like, oh, that's never going to work. But it turns out it actually does work pretty well.
Right.
You just like you said, Brennan, just look at the stratification of your average major. Like there's obviously anomalies, right? You'll always have that 75% GM and whatever, but for the most part, it works pretty well. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt what you're saying, Kurt, but that blows me away that it really has worked as well as it has.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It just, I think especially initially, early on, it was better. I think it's gotten kind of worse
Yes.
over time.
Yep.
Which kind of contributes to some of the, especially, I mean, obviously with the 23s and 24s, which is kind of one of the big motivating factors for the board to create the classifier committee, like the high hit factors for those, to bring kind of the listener up to speed, those were kind of set either too high or too low, in a very obvious way. And so the board was like, all right, we need to do something about this. And so they created the classifier committee to come up with some recommendations. But yeah, just looking at the old way of doing things, it is kind of surprising, but at the same time, like if you think about it, it's also kind of not in the same way, because ultimately we're still looking at shooting skills. We're still measuring the fundamental shooting skills, even if the classifier stages like LPRES don't necessarily replicate what we shoot at and what is a normal USPSA stage today.
Right.
It still is shooting skills, right?
Right.
Um,
As it
just
turns
like
out, the ability to like shoot fast and collect points is kind of important.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Turns out,
You're right.
it just like for my during my kind of progression to getting higher ranked, both in PCC and in pistol, classing up, like one thing I realized, like a significant classifier skill that'll help you progress in your classification is draws, reloads. That, like, if you can get your draws and reloads significantly faster, that'll make a huge difference in your classification score.
100%.
However, your draws and reloads don't make a huge difference in a match, except for at the very highest levels. Because most of the times in most stages, your draws and reloads can be buried into movement, and so you can like not be super fast with draws and reloads in a stage, but draws and reloads in a classifier stage, like especially like LPRES, where you're standing there doing nothing, make a huge difference. And that's where it's like, okay, well, that's a perfect example of like the classifier doesn't exactly match up with the sport.
Right.
But it is still a technical shooting skill that you need to be successful in the sport, right? And that's kind of like where we're going about changing things or improving things, is try to make the classification system more representative of the sport while still being true to like the shooting skills themselves.
Yeah, and like I think I forget who mentioned, maybe Brennan, but like some of the work you're going to put in, people talk about all the time on some of those skills that may not seem to have direct application to the sport, like still do. Like, yes, we don't do a whole lot of, in USPSA, we don't do a whole lot of like strong hand weak hand on stages, right? But like that work that you put in to figure out how to press a trigger without moving the gun when your support hand isn't there is only going to work better, right, on that stage when you have a two-handed grip, right? So like, oh, man, to me, all that work you put in on the various, gun handling skills and so forth, like the benefit is still there to your shooting for sure.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think like what you were saying, Brennan, like, you know, man, as you're chasing that letter, maybe working on things that might have a different priority list than it would if you were just chasing match performance. Like the benefit to your shooting is still there.
Yeah.
And just to Kurt's point, measuring those skills is still important. But you know, this is changes that haven't been announced yet. But I think generally we are going to be hopefully adding some new stages. We're obviously bringing back some really good stages from the 23 and 24 series that I think test shooting skills really well, but also adding some more stage style courses both for indoor and outdoor in the near future. So that's definitely been one of the biggest, I think, probably complaints that we'll hopefully be addressing. Is that, man, like none of the classification system doesn't test shooting the same way that that the sport does. And it's like, well, yeah, first of all, it actually works pretty well, as it turns out, because we're testing those fundamental skills, which are the absolute core of the sport for sure. But also, yes, yeah, fair enough. We should have some stages as a part of the classifier catalog for sure, that give us the ability to test stage strategy, right? Blending
Hmm.
positions, things like that are
Hmm.
largely left out of the current catalog. And so we'll get to it. But one of the reasons that some of the stages had to be reduced from the current catalog is to make room for some of those new ones for sure. So
I think one note on those stage on the stage design thing too, is like as soon as you make something standardized, right, which a classifier is a standardized stage, then people are going to set it up and practice it and game it, right? Because just like the bill drill is always 6 rounds at 7 yards or whatever, right?
yep.
Like, well, I can do that 100 times and figure out some very interesting things about how to
Hmm.
game that drill. But if
Right.
it's something I've never heard before, like if you've never heard of El Prez or whatever it is, like you're not gonna know, okay, well, if I put my ankles like this and load one heel and one toe and push this way
Yeah.
and put my one hand over my nose or whatever the fuck people are trying to do on that thing, like there's things that people do to game that classifier. And so no matter what it is, if it's a field course looking classifier or not, like
Hmm.
people will very quickly come up with like, oh, well, the best way to shoot this, right, is this way, right? So
Oh yeah.
it's never going to be at the exact same measurement or metric as a stage that we've never seen before,
For
which
sure.
Oh
most
yeah.
stages are. So,
For sure. But I do think there is room. People are gonna decide over time, but there's room to make good enough stage designs where even top shooters disagree about the best way to do it, even on simple classifiers. I mean, Trace Chaos is probably the perfect example of that. Like I've gotten into arguments with top GMs fairly recently about like, hey, do you draw and shoot in the middle, or do you go like left or right first, that kind of thing, and people do not agree on it. Right? To me, it seems very obvious. The best way to do it, but the point is like that's actually an example of a really strong stage design. But
What's your
I think
take on
there's things
that
we
one?
can do in that regard. Uh, Even with my draw as fast as it is, I would never just do it standing still when I have somewhere to go on that stage. That's me
Mm,
personally.
yeah.
Um,
And
so anyway,
yeah, you've got that ridiculous draw. So
right, yeah, but I mean, it's
yeah, yeah.
even
No, you're
if
right.
it's 6/10, like that's time you could have spent doing two things instead of one thing.
Yeah,
So
and that actually reminds me. I recently had somebody at a local match ask me basically that sort of question. It's like, hey, should I? Because it was a seeded start, and their question was like, should I stand and draw and take this target right here before doing anything else? And I just told him, was like, hold up, you got to stand there and do all that stuff,
right,
then shoot that target, and then move.
right.
It's like, why don't you just run over there, and then you can bury your stand and draw all in the movement, right? And he's like, oh,
Right.
that's why we ask you these sort of things. Like,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Cool. So, anyway, before we lose our whole time on the podcast, we should get into some of the specifics behind what we're
yeah,
updating, and kind of what's going on. I guess the key thing to start with, we've kind of introduced it already. There have been different ways of obviously setting um, classifier high hit factors over time, which have had varying means of success. Some of them have worked out pretty close. Some of them, like 23 and 24 series, have been obviously way off in opposite directions, like way too high, way too low. Some of them have been kind of close, but one of our big priorities and mandates, I think, from our charter was, hey, we need to have like an actual way to set high hit factors, in a consistent, like data driven way, which will not only improve the accuracy but the consistency. Like, hey, these are all set the same way. We're not going to have like, hey, the 99 series is hard and the 22 series is easy. Like that's not the kind of thing we're looking for moving forward in terms of high hit factors. So. And you're the expert on this one. In layman's terms, what's kind of going on with setting high hit factors here moving forward?
Yeah, so traditionally, high hit factors have been set like even like the concept of high hit factor, right? We think of like the highest score ever,
Yep.
right? Like at a match, the 100% is the person with the highest score, right? The highest hit factor.
Mm-hmm.
And so traditionally, highest hit factor has been some sort of like average of the best scores ever, or something to that effect. And
I've
over
literally heard
time,
people
that's
like
led
say
to
like, "Hey, your the high hit factor should be the limit of human function," and it's like,
right.
okay, well,
Yeah, exactly. And so there's that concept, right? That people have debated over, right, over time. But that just hasn't worked out in practice. And so kind of what we're moving, we have moved the concept from, instead of being that sort of like highest achievable possible performance, we're now moving towards kind of percentile based, of like the like overall, how does everyone in USPSA perform, um, and then kind of basing the high hit factor off of that.
That's great.
Right. So we like basically like we have some notion of like how many GMs there should be, how many M's, how many A's, right? Some in kind of using the mathematics behind that. So how we've done that specifically is we've decided the top 3%, the top, so the 97th percentile is equal to the 90% high hit factor. So we kind of, as far as like the statistical distribution, that's kind of how we set the high hit factor. So this roughly works out to where grant GMs are the top 1%, so the 99th percentile. Masters are the 95th percentile, so the top 5% or better. And the 85th percentile is A class or better. And that's kind of like the rough like benchmark of like how we're doing things. And so like, so that means then if we're looking at, kind of a date range for the data, rather than looking at all data all the time, over time, is that basically as the membership gets better or worse over time, that sort of like percentile, what high hit factor is, can shift up and down to kind of reflect like this current skill base of the membership. So instead of, like I said, instead of being like,
go ahead.
sorry, yeah. So instead of being like that, like best possible human achievement, performance, possibly human, whatever. It's kind of what is the skill base of the membership, and how do you rank within that skill base?
So you're hitting a couple, I think, massive misconceptions here that people have had, even about the historical system. As an example, obviously the limit of human function, like how the high hit factors are set, it's always been difficulty based. In other words, it should be there should be a certain level of difficulty to make GM, right? And of course that's how it's set. And the way the percentages work changes a little bit on the stage. Like some stages are pretty compressed. Like there's not a whole lot of room for like massive separation between a GM and say an A class shooter. Like that, I've seen stages where like the differences between like those 95% runs and the A class runs are like a quarter to a half a second, right? And so like it's a very very small difference. And so sometimes those percentages like are, if you just set the best run you have at that 100%, like it either makes everything way too easy or way too hard. But also, that I think the big misconception is like people think, some of the people that say that as well also have this conception that like GM is the top 5% of shooters in the sport. Of course, that's never been the case either. That 95%, right, is just the score you have to hit to make GM, but it's actually like a way smaller percentage, obviously, of the shooters are GMs. But to really simplify it, so like basically, what you're saying, Curves, like, hey, if we have if we collect 1,000 scores of random shooters in the sport, like, hey, basically the top 30 of those we would expect to be GM runs. And so that's kind of how you use that kind of math to set the high hit factors, right?
So not so the top 30. So for like the top, sorry, so the 97th percentile. So like the top 30 would be 90%. So not GM. So
right. Yeah. Thank
kind
you.
of the target is like the would be the top 10 out of 100. So
right.
the 1 percentile. Yeah.
Right. Which is way less than people think. Again, they're thinking that the top 5% of shooters and so forth, it doesn't actually work out that way.
Right. And like I think when I looked at the numbers last, I want to say there's something like less than 400 total unique GMs that are currently active in USPSA.
Unique across all divisions, right?
Yeah, across all divisions, right. Unique. That includes people that like shoot multiple divisions.
Right.
And that's out of 40,000 members, right? Or 39,800 or whatever. And so so like think about that. Yeah, roughly 400 out of 40,000. Like that's what, about 1%,
right?
Off the top of my head as well. So like that's where we're at as well. And so we're kind of keeping that target as well. So we're looking at like basically, we look at the scores, say we get 1,000 scores, and then that we the scores produce a nice bell curve, and from that bell curve we can nice and easily pick the high hit factor that gives us that top 1% equals GM.
Right, which is a huge side benefit to that. Like I think a misconception or an idea in the past has been, hey, if in order to set these hit factors properly on these stages, based on limited human function, like we need the best shooters in the country to shoot these stages before we can actually put them into the catalog. Therefore, we have to run them at nationals and that kind of thing. Which that logic may have been flawed anyway, but no longer need that using the system, right? Like what's really not so much like having the best run ever, but like a really good distribution kind of across the curve of average shooters, if you will, to set that data, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's the great thing about statistics and statistical distributions is that we don't actually need the extreme ends. So we don't actually need the Christian Seilers to shoot the stages to get a good number, but we need your B's and C class shooters and your A class shooters to shoot it. And as long as we got a good number of those to shoot it, then we can actually get a good high hit factors. And we actually did a very, very thorough study looking at how many scores we actually need to get a good high hit factor. And so like we're talking about 1,000. That's just like a high, a number we're throwing out here for an example. But we only need something like 100 scores to get a high hit factor that's like, about what was it, like 2 to 3% error off of the actual high hit factor once you're at about 1,000 scores, right? Like compared to 1,000 scores. So like you really don't need that many scores as long as as long as it's reasonable data. So that's one of the things that's cool about this method is that we just need good data that's from the average shooter rather than like having that extreme limit of human performance shoot the stage for us.
So question on that. So I mean, obviously, like well, maybe not. I was going to say everyone knows how to do this, but probably most people don't actually know how to do this. So like, let's say a B class shooter shoots a classifier at 65%, right? And whatever their whatever that hit factor is, right? Like based on knowing what their hit factor was and the fact that it was 65%, you can determine what the high hit factor or the 100% is for that classifier, right? Without ever seen somebody shoot it, right? Like you just do the math. So when you're saying that we need a bunch of B class or C class shooters to shoot these, like, are you relying on the fact that they are already that class? Or
no,
are you just taking everybody and coming up with new averages based on percentiles?
So that's a very good question. So we're not looking at all what your current classification is.
Okay.
We're just looking at purely the raw number.
Okay.
The raw scores.
Okay.
And what I mean by like we just need the average shooter. We just need people to shoot it. right?
Okay.
And the people that are going to shoot it the most are going to be your B's and C's,
Sure.
and probably really your A's, because typically we have more A's and B's that are shooting matches than
Sure.
C's and D's, but
Yep.
yeah, we need a bunch of those people shooting stages, and like we don't necessarily need Christian Seiler to shoot a bunch of stages, but if Christian Seiler wants to give us a bunch of data, that'll help us get the scores as well.
Totally.
Yeah, so we're it's not, the method doesn't look at all at your current
Okay.
classification record at all. It just purely looks at the distribution of the raw scores.
Cool.
And and this, so probably the coolest thing about this to me is new divisions and big division changes. This is where we've run into a lot of issues, I think, with the classifier system. Obviously, hey, let's run it at nationals and average the top 10 or whatever systems have been used over the years have worked, fairly well. The problem is, hey, guess what? We're going to sit here and add carry optics, this brand new division, to the sport. Well, you can't go back and run every single classifier in the catalog at the first carry optics nationals and set all the head factors, right? No one's going to go for that. So now you're guessing, or you're extrapolating off other divisions, or what the case may be. And we've seen a lot of times when those big changes happen, it's either way too hard, or like in the case of carry optics and PCC, maybe way too easy. We get a bunch of free GMs, early on, or maybe in the case of limited optics, it's kind of a mixed bag, and you never know what you're going to get. And so now, we can just collect that data outside of those specialty events and set the high factors appropriately for new divisions or, big division changes. Like right now, obviously we're working through the big change to limited 10, not a new division at all, very old division, but man, such a substantial change to it that it essentially is a new division. It's like, man, we got to start over. But now we have a good way to do it and actually set those scores outside of something like nationals, which is super important.
Right. And honestly, I think the way they did it before, where like adding a new division where they just kind of like made up hit factors, is one of the main reasons I believe that there is animosity to this day towards PCC, is because they made PCC hit factors way too easy.
Yep.
And that's like, and obviously as a PCC guy, I don't like that, but I think that's is a contributing factor. So with our new method, as new divisions are created, or we make major division changes, like changing production to 15, we can make these updated hit factors pretty quickly, and actually have them be reasonable.
Yep. Cool. So along with that, right, having a system set the high head factors, we can start thinking a little bit about, okay, other than just accurately calibrating difficulty, what kind of shooting do we want to reward, if you will? Part of that being, hey, there's lots of different ways to define quote unquote good shooting. We could just decide, hey, a good shooter will shoot all alphas, and therefore we're really going to reward accurate shooting, in the classifier system. But realistically, what we're trying to do is have good correlation, I think, to like the kind of shooting that will help you do really well at major matches, right? So in other words, correlation to kind of major match performance. That's the kind of shooting that we're looking for. In addition, we're trying to avoid, like you kind of mentioned already, Kurt, right? The ability to game the system, right? To sort of artificially manipulate your scores in a way that will help you, do better, or in some cases even do worse, intentionally, depending on what your goals are, right? And so that kind of leads us to some changes of our flags, that have currently been in the system. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I can't wait for this. I'm just so curious.
Yeah. So one thing that is changing is we're removing the B, C, and G flags, which, if I assume many of you may or may not be familiar, but the B, C, and G flags are basically, if your score is less than 5% of your current class, or if you less than 2% of total hit factor, or outside of your current class, then it just like wouldn't count at all. So for example, like say you're currently an A class shooter and you got like a 50% score, it just wouldn't count. Or if you got a 0, it just wouldn't count towards your classification record. we're doing away with that. So now if you get a 0, it will count, right? So we're still doing best 6 out of 8. So you'll still you'll get a chance of throwing away 2 of your lowest scores. So if you get 3 zeros, then one of those zeros will count towards your record.
Wait, so before I heard you say on Instagram that the less than 2%, so that was changed.
So
The G
that
flag.
was changed. No, yeah, that was changed.
Perfect. I love that. Awesome.
Yeah, because
you can still very easily decide to 0 something.
Yeah. So actually, our fun fact: our original intent was not to have G, the concept of G, but we at least in our internal discussions, we didn't cover the G because mathematically and programmatically it never showed up within the data, because the B flag had basically erased the G flag within the data set. Yeah, we always caught it.
Yep.
And so us being at least on the data side, us being programmers, we never saw the G flag in the data, so we just didn't even consider the G flag from a data standpoint. And then but in our discussion, we wanted to get rid of hero or zero, or sorry, we wanted to get rid of hero or zeroing, and intentionally throwing away your stage so you can save your protect your current class. We wanted to stop that behavior. And then as soon as we posted that, oh yeah, we're doing this thing, and everyone's like, oh sweet, we can still 0 the stage. We're like, well.
And we honestly kind of had to check. I mean, there was a moment where we weren't even sure if the G flag was still switched on. Again, it was kind of superseded by the B flag, right? It's essentially been retired for a very long time and not used ever. But I just want to make it very clear that is not going to be a thing. We are officially removing the G flag. Yeah, it's not going to be a thing. And to Kurt's point, obviously, to me, it's it's not even so much hey, we're stopping people from intentionally taking stages. It's not that. It's to me, the system in its current iteration incentivizes people to fairly often shoot worse at matches. That is how it's actually sort of functioning, right? In other words, hey man, I'm trying to make GM. I'm shooting this classifier. I gamed it ahead of time. I looked it up. I did the math. I know I have to shoot this many points at this pace, whatever the case may be. Hey, I see that I just shot that delta, so there's no way I'm going to get a GM score. I got 2 options. I can either finish it and allow it to hurt my percentage, or I can just tank this thing on purpose, right? I can throw an extra one in the no shoot, or I can take an extra shot 2 seconds later than I have to, whatever. And with the current flags, that will reward me for doing that by not allowing it to count towards my percentage. So literally, this tool that's supposed to be helping people get better at shooting is incentivizing people to shoot worse on purpose in some cases.
And the way it's set up, I can't blame people for doing that at all.
Correct.
Right.
You almost have to do that. At a certain point.
Especially if you've been really working your ass off or you got unlucky, or maybe your gun jammed or something like that, and it's okay, that sucks. Right. And then they wait 5 seconds and plug the no shoot 5 times, and it's yeah, I totally get it, man. You're one good classifier away from making this after a year of work.
This is one of those things that I was taught to do when I first started in the sport, right? By the B class mafia that runs the stages and so forth. They're like, hey man, here's the deal. You get on this classifier, if you hit that no shoot over there, you should probably shoot it another 2 or 3 times just to make sure. This is the advice that you get, right? And so
and also I think part of that attitude comes from the fact that high hit factors are so unobtainably high in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so another thing, we didn't quite discuss it, but part of our change here is the high factors are all coming down. So yes, we are, getting rid of these sort of protections, but the high hit factors are now going to be a bit more reasonable, that you should, if you're shooting the stage at a match pace and not trying to, not it's not forcing you, we're not requiring you to shoot it at your
set a record
100, your record setting 120% trying to get lucky pace, in order to get it to, because in my opinion, if if the system requires you to shoot in a way where you get lucky to rank up, then
Right.
that's not your real skill, right?
Correct.
And so we're changing it intentionally to be to where, you know, we want to see what your consistent, you know, average match to match, stage to stage skill is, instead
Mhm.
of what is your lucky skill or what is your you know, bad day skill, right?
Mhm.
We want to see like what is your typical day to day match skill.
Right. So I mean, two huge wins here. First of all, I maybe mention really quickly. So like the number one objection I hear to this is like, well, what about, you know, if I have a malfunction or whatever, something that's not my fault? It's like, well, first of all,
It is your fault.
it's your fault. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
running, having gear that works is part of the sport. If you have a malfunction during a major, it will certainly affect your placement 100%. Ask me how I know. It definitely happened to me before, right?
How do you know?
Yeah. And so, you know, it is part of it. But also, like, you still do have that best 6 out of 8, right? So there is still some protection there in terms of the average if you're having it on occasion. But like I've said to several people, I'm like, okay, so you have some protection against essentially 20% of your runs, with the best, you know, your worst 2 getting dropped. If you are having malfunctions on more than 20% of your stages, that is absolutely a choice. And you deserve to be graded as a result, on that deal, right? So that's kind of take on that. But um, yeah, so the 2 big wins here are, number 1, just making it much more difficult to intentionally sort of manipulate your results, right? Intentional tanking or whatever, to manipulate the results, right? So we're taking kind of the loopholes out. But also, like Kurt was saying, we're now rewarding a different style of shooting. Instead of setting high head factors to be so unattainable that you have to go crazy, hero or zero mode, and either you hook up and get lucky or you miss and it doesn't matter because it doesn't count. Instead of that kind of style of shooting, now it's going to reward consistency, because, you know, almost all of your scores are going to count. You can't really go that hero zero mode anymore. You're gonna have to shoot at a consistent level if you want your that average to really reflect your skill. So hopefully it works out this way. The way I kind of visualize it in my mind, and I hope this is kind of the case, is like, man, if you're a guy that, as an example, shoots on average at a GM level at majors, right? You're in somewhere in that GM pack. You should be able to just go to your locals and shoot those classification stages like any other stage, right? Just shoot it like you would any other stage and just make GM, right? Without like intentionally doing anything differently. Like, that is the intention. To just really like reflect you shooting the way that you should, right, for that class, and to more sort of accurately, um, assess those skills in those stages. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm extremely optimistic in how it's going to work out. I think it's going to be hopefully a big improvement, right off the bat. But
Is
yeah.
there anything you guys can share as far as like how much the high hit factors are getting decreased?
So
Yeah, let me pull some up here.
important to, while Kurt's kind of looking
Because
that up, important to note that, not all of them are being decreased, right? So there's calibrations happening across the whole thing, right? So some of them are going, you know, up, like the 23 series,
yeah,
as
sure,
examples. Some of those are going up, you know, somewhat substantially. A lot of them are going down. On average, are coming down.
sure.
There has been, I meant to say this early on. Obviously, all of this, there was the last batch of things we're talking about here have just been approved literally this week at the USPSA board meeting. As of right now, as I'm recording this, the announcement has not hit, the website yet with all of our, data and documents that
Mhm.
will kind of explain all this. But stay tuned for that. There's going to be a list in there of the high hit factor adjustments that are actually official, as well as everything else and way more information that we're not discussing here, on the podcast. For right now, I think Kurt's going to give us some numbers, but you can kind of reference, hitfactor.info. It's a great tool. Again, that's not official, data, but it'll give you a rough idea if you look at those kind of brutal mode high hit factors, kind of the direction of things will be going. But Kurt, I'm sure you have better info on that.
Yeah, yeah. So we are going to release to the public like the actual high hit factor numbers, both the old and the news. Uh, but I have them right here. So for carry optics, for example, the average sort of decrease is in the ballpark between a half of a hit factor to one.
Oh wow.
So like El Pres, for example, is a decrease of 1.3. So to show you how bad the 24s were, so everyone's favorite, this one's the least worst. Well, almost the second least worst. Everyone's favorite 2408, which was at Open Nationals, where no one in Open shot a GM run. At least for carry optics, it's being decreased by 1.7. 2402 is being decreased by 3.4. Yeah, that's pretty
3.4 hit
crazy.
factors.
3.4
Yeah.
hit factors. Yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Holy crap!
So let's see.
It's a big swing. Obviously, they were too difficult even under the old system, right? But now we're stacking that with the difficulty calibration for removing the flags. So even some of the old ones that were set pretty well, if you had a hit factor
Yeah,
that was kind of set perfectly under the old system, that's going to need to be lowered now with the increased difficulty from removing those flags. But those that were already too high, like 24 series, are coming down even more.
So
yep,
I mean, in terms of like percentage, you're looking at anywhere from. I mean, I guess it's going to vary pretty greatly, I guess. But I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I'd say like roughly 10-ish%, 5 to 10%.
yeah, I was going to guess 5.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, Billy, you were saying the goal would be, if you're a GM who places with GMs at, a competitive GM, you
Hmm.
go to a major and you place well. You walk into a local, you should be able to pretty much just throw up GM scores, shooting that the same way you would for a major match prep or whatever.
Right.
It's interesting to me, like when and maybe I'm sure you guys have better data on this, but when I look at um, big matches, so like area matches or national matches, like the GMs aren't all 95 and up. It's more like
Correct.
90 and above. And M's are usually around 80 to 90. And it's about a 5% difference from what the classification percentages are. Obviously, I know
Hmm.
it's not a perfect direct one to one, but when you are looking at that, I look at that a little bit kind of similarly. Like when I go to a major, I'm M class, right? And if I shoot well, place high in the M's, right? When I go to a major, if I shoot 90% on a stage, that's a great stage for me. If I shot all 90%, I'd be ecstatic, right? I'd be well into the 90% range for the total finish. But that's so when I go to, when I shoot like a 90% on a classifier, like I'm like, yeah, that seems very reasonable, right? Like a 95 or 97 is doing extra good, right? Anything lower than that is maybe not the greatest performance I've ever had. So seeing some carryover to that, tying it into, like you're saying, major match performance, even for the people who are not going to be shooting majors, I think that's really cool.
yeah. And so when we also talk about correlation to majors, so when we did our correlation mathematics, we were actually correlating it with Jay Slater's
Hmm.
ELO, and so and that rating, and not we weren't looking at like match finish percentage. So that is an important distinction because, uh, in my opinion, Matt, because skill is on a bell curve. If you look at the like classification percentage versus match finish at nationals, I mean, you look at someone like Christian Seiler and like that like top 5, top 10 people,
Hmm.
that like match finish percent like jumps drastically compared to everyone else.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to say like what like a match finish at nationals should be from a classification standpoint. Um,
And part
and
of that's just
so
because it varies. It varies so wildly from match to match. Like even Carabas
yeah,
Nationals, you were just talking about Brennan. It's like, okay, it's pretty fair to say that if the Frenchman had not showed up to that match, like we would have all been 3% higher,
Yeah, certainly.
right? So it's like, yeah, those percentages, change pretty drastically. Obviously different matches allow for different amounts of separation,
Yes.
um, based upon the skill set differences as well. How many stages are there? right? So the longer the match is, the more stages there are, the more separation you're going to see over time. So all that impacts, those percentages. So it's an objection I've heard over and over and over again. Well, the classification doesn't work. We see GMs down at 88% or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I don't think that that's indicative of the fact we have too many GMs. Like to Kurt's point, we have roughly 1% or less of the sport is kind of GMs. It's not about predicting match percentage, right? But when you look at placement and sort of the stratification of those shooters, that's kind of what seems to be the bigger indicator to me.
So one thing I always think is funny, that like notion of like we have people thinking we have too many GMs, or there's a lot of like sandbagger GMs, or whatever, is several things, right? So like your average, say, GM type person is not competitive with Christian Seiler. Okay.
Sure.
Correct.
And so there's that skill, there's like that skill level separation between like your average GM and then someone who's winning, a national champion. Right. So there's like a whole other level of separation between a GM and a national champ that is not recognized in classification.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. And then also there's what's called like the Pareto distribution, which is, you kind of heard the term of like 20% of the people do 80% of the work,
Mhm.
right? So like the same thing is kind of true in shooting sports, right? So like for the membership, the average member shoots less than 4 matches per year. But there's people like us, like I shoot like 6 or 7 matches a month, and I'm probably on the low end for a lot of people, right? So
Sure.
right, and then you like, so like GMs are kind of like overrepresented in the sense of like M's and GMs shoot a crap ton of matches, and so people see M's and GMs, and maybe like those like GMs like me, where I'm not performing nearly as well as I was when I actually made GM. So they'll see someone like me where I'm like not shooting very well at a local match, like, oh well, GMs just kind of suck, or like there's this issue with the classification system or whatever.
Right.
And then I'm shooting every single match locally, so everyone's seeing me shoot. So there's that like perception of that like overrepresentation of people in that GM category that shoot every single match that may or may not be. So you get that like visual perception that people see.
Totally. Yeah. And perfect example of the overrepresentation thing. I mean, again, the match is starting like literally today. Brennan was talking about South Carolina section. I think there's like 300 shooters and there's 33 GMs, right? So 1% of shooters is accounting for 10% of the shooters at that major, right? And of course you would kind of expect that because, the top shooters probably care about going to major championships, right? But you're right. It does impact that perception. Like, why is there so many GMs? And it's like, well, there's not that many. We're just all here from across the country, right? There's probably not very many C-class shooters from Arizona that flew in to shoot South Carolina section.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's
Like
definitely
usually
some GMs from across the country that did.
Yeah, usually like the number of M's is the highest, and then probably maybe like A's and G's or something like that, just because of how few GMs there are. But like at a big match like that, it's probably M's, G's, and then A, B, and C in that order, probably.
Yeah.
Just because it's way easier to make M. Obviously.
And then also, it's kind of a step back a couple topics here. So the other thing I've always like tell people too when it comes to like nationals finish is like I think someone like Christian Seiler is like his classification should be like 110% or 120%.
Sure.
Right. Not 100%. And on that note, something else we're doing, Brennan, that you might be interested in is we're actually changing the score ceiling for an individual stage score to 110%. So
really,
yeah. So for an individual score and your average, you can go up to 110% now. So that
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that will affect the math for how
for sure it does.
your average gets put together.
For one thing, it gives
pretty much
Well, go ahead.
One thing we're doing that I'm slightly skeptical about. We'll see how it works. I
Well,
still am holding on to some reservations about this thing, but we'll see how it goes.
So I'm actually a little skeptical about that as well, and I shouldn't be, because when I think about it, like, it should benefit me a lot as a masterclass
100%.
aspiring grandmaster shooter,
Yeah.
right? But
Right,
like
it
one
gives you
thing that
more
I
headroom.
deal with a lot is consistency at the at like what I call like a push pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Push pace is like, I don't really like match mode term anymore, but like, not holding back at all, but still being very, very accountable for your hits. And for me to nail 95s, 4 of those or 6 of those in a row, like, that consistency has to be on point. The same way that I have to approach a major match, my consistency needs to be there. Will I have one stage out of 6 that's going to be worse, or 2 stages? Of course, right? But in general, those good scores are going to stick. But there's only 5% of buffer room there.
Yeah.
Adding an additional 10, yeah, I mean, it should make it easier for M's to class up to G. But maybe removing the flags balances that out. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's currently kind of our assumption. Is that it kind of like helps balance with the flag removal, and then it does, as far as like the pure correlation, as far as math is concerned, it does improve correlation to major scores.
Will it ever
Major elo.
will
Yeah.
that ever reflect on your classification record that you potentially hold above a 100%?
I believe it should.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
we got that. We got that confirmed.
So you could be a 110% GM then.
Yeah.
And also, so like that you're because the flags are gone now, right? So people have asked about, hey, because the flags are gone, can I like lose my letter and so forth? And it's like, no. Once just like it is now, once you make, let's M class, whatever it is, like, you can't lose that. We see that kind of as not only a measurement of skill, but also a sort of taking note of all-time achievement. So you're not going to lose that, but your current percentage will still be floating, right? So it's very possible that
Yes.
you could be an M class that's at 20%, right? Like that, yeah, that percentage will still float based upon the best 6 out of your last 8, right?
Yes.
So not only could you maybe go above 100%, but you could also have a percentage that says, hey, yeah, I was a GM at one time, but these days I'm more like A class or whatever. And your percentage will kind of show that, which is kind of cool, honestly. As somebody that's in GM, it very easy to just like not really care about classifiers at all anymore. It's just like it's kind of wasted time. But now you can actually kind of use that as an ongoing assessment, even as a GM, of like,
Mhm.
hey, where am I right now? So it's kind of an ongoing tool, which I think is pretty cool for sure.
We'll see a
Which
lot of GMs in the 80% range, for sure.
yeah,
We'll see.
I'm personally excited about being able to have the floating percentage and like kind of track again my kind of rebuilding my own skill.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like your classic example, Kurt, of like, hey, you've shifted your focus away from shooting to like the management side, right? The scores have
Yeah.
suffered as a result. It's time to like build back those skills.
Yeah.
As somebody who was GM before, like currently the classification system is not very useful to you in terms of like tracking percentage and so forth. But
Yeah.
now you can use, even though your letter won't change, you can use that
Right.
to track those improvements again. Which is
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's like it's a useful tool again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for
I
guys
mentioned
who
as
shoot a
well.
lot, of majors too, it helps them track their major performances over the year as well. Like, I know a lot of top guys maybe like don't shoot a lot of classifiers or locals, right? Because they're busy with other stuff, but they do hit, 5 to maybe even 10 majors a year. Well, like, that's kind of a great way to look at over the year. Like, okay, from January to December, whatever the shooting season is, all right, like, where was I for 2025? Right. And then, maybe I can overall do better next year or whatever.
Yeah.
We've brought up ELO several times, Kurt especially, and I have gotten quite a number of questions about that. Like, hey, are we working ELO essentially into the classification system? I mean, to Kurt's note, obviously they used it to check for correlation, to make sure that the changes we're making to the classification system sort of agree with how ELO would rate people, which is great. I'll mention quickly. I think it's sort of the utility of ELO is entirely different than the class system. Like we mentioned in the beginning, the primary utility, like where the class system is most useful, is for shooters that are kind of only shooting those locals. Maybe there aren't any like really good shooters in their area or in their division that they're shooting against. And that's where the classification system excels at providing them an assessment. That's exactly where ELO doesn't really work at all, because it has nothing to compare those shooters really against. For those that are kind of tracking ELO, like it does a fantastic job. I love the work Jay's doing with that, at sort of giving ratings or rankings to shooters based upon major match performance or match performance in general against good shooters. But man, if you're not shooting against anybody that shoots against anybody, it's really hard, to say, okay, like here's a bunch of people that are shooting roughly the same level, and maybe they're all B class or whatever, but I don't really know how to extrapolate that, or set those ratings kind of for ELO specifically. So it doesn't really work as a replacement for the class system at all, but definitely a good tool I know the guys have used to kind of measure against, for sure. I think it'd be really cool long term. Obviously, this is kind of, again, Jay's project, not really the committee as a whole, let alone USPSA. But it'd be really cool if we kind of integrate ELO as kind of a side system, if you will. It's like separate from the classification system, but the kind of the rating or the ranking system that Jay has, I think would be a really cool replacement almost for like the USPSA top 20 list. Like, I'm not saying we could have that too. It's cool to have those like classifier leaderboards, if you will, and similar to like what hitfactor.info gives us, but
something
having like
interesting to look at.
a real overall like ranking system that's kind of official through the org, using something similar to ELO would be really cool long term. But we'll see if that makes the pipeline.
The top 20 list as well, with the flags going away, will also become much more interesting to look at. Like right now, I look at it, like I couldn't give a crap, right?
Yes.
Like generally, like I don't really care like if somebody's 100% GM or whatever it is, because like I have no way of knowing, did they actually just shoot 6 100s in a row, like, or do they have a bunch of like really shitty ones in there also, right?
Yeah,
so
it's going to kind of get tanked, I think, by the uncapped thing. Christian Seiler, as an example, will never probably be over 100%. Because he doesn't really shoot classifiers. And even if you win at a major, you can't shoot over 100%. So he's sort of hard stuck at 100%, right? Whereas, classifier specialists that have like really good draws and splits and reloads and stuff might be able to get over 100%, right? So it'll be an interesting shift where right now a lot of the top guys are in that top 20 list because all they do is go win majors and just stack hundreds. I suspect that'll change with Uncapped, but we'll see.
Yeah, and also like in one important thing with the classifier stuff too is like the committee, we're being proactive and following what we're doing too, and we're willing to listen to feedback and follow the data and all that. So unlike kind of USPSA of old, right, which kind of like set it and forget it type deal. Like I was looking at the 23s the other day, and all the hit factors are the same. High hit factors are the same as when they set them, which is crazy. Sorry, not the 23s. I was looking at the 22s. Now, so like 3 years ago. And they're still the same from when they first set them, and it just, like, that's kind of crazy to me. And they haven't been updated. Whereas like for us, like we want to look at how are things going after the summer, the peak of the season happens. Like how was the data rolling out? How are everyone's classifications actually being affected by these changes? Like, does the uncapped actually make sense once people actually start shooting with the new changes? Things of that nature. So like we'll be willing to make changes kind of on the fly, as if they make sense, in order to make it better for everybody, rather than just like, here you guys go, we're going off to Disney World.
Yeah,
hopefully it's better, right?
I mean, long term, I don't think I'm speaking out of school in this one, but in long term, I mean, we'd like especially high hit factor maintenance, to be much more of like an automated approach, right? Obviously, we're setting, this mathematical system. Essentially, we're not really having a whole lot of manual input into high hit factor changes, right? It's basically automated. Right now we have to hit the button, and we're going to continue to review those before they get updated and so forth. But I mean, long term, hopefully that'll be an automated system where it's like, hey, as data comes in, if things need to be tweaked a little bit, like that just happens. And so nobody's responsible. There's not going to be these big lags, to your point, Kurt, where there's going to be like years upon years where it's very, very clear that high hit factors need to be updated, and they're just not for some reason. That should really not be a thing moving forward, which is very good.
Yeah.
Question for you guys.
Yep.
How many new classifiers are being added, and how many are getting chopped? I think that's a question that has been asked quite a bit.
The chopped list we can answer for sure.
Okay.
That's already out. It's been released. It's being reduced pretty significantly. Couple reasons for that we mentioned already. I think Kurt's probably pulling up the actual number. I forget what it is off the top of my head, but couple reasons for that. Number one, there are obviously a lot of old legacy stages, some of which are like literally illegal, because like rules have been changed since they were written, and like the stages are like not even legal under new rules and stuff. They've just never been updated. It's like some of those had to go. In some cases, like there's things like fixed time classifiers don't really make a whole lot of sense when like Revolver and PCC exist. Setting a part-time for that makes sense for both of those is like not really a thing unless you just make it like a bunch of targets and it's 100% unattainable for everybody. Like maybe it would make sense, but like none of the current stages really made sense. Pretty commonly for PCC especially.
Yeah.
And so like some of those are going. There's obviously a lot of existing stages that are just extremely, extremely similar. Like they're basically the exact same thing. Like, I mean, probably half of them are some version of 6 Reload 6.
Yeah.
And so, we don't need all of those. Some of them were just not very good. And then also like to what we've been discussing so far, since we're basing high factors based upon data collection now, particularly in lower participation division, think about like what we're doing right now for L10. We need new high hit factors for every classifier for L10. Well, I think we've had I think we were just talking about this earlier today. Actually, I think we've had like 400 scores for L10 like so far this year. But man, even with that, if you have 100 and some classifier stages, it's going to take a long time to get the data that you need across all of those stages. And so reducing that quite a bit will allow us to maintain hit factors a lot better, especially for those lower divisions, lower participation. So there was definitely a requirement to remove a bunch of them for sure.
Yeah. So in this first pass, we've retired 46 stages.
Out of how many active ones?
Out of 100 active stages.
Wow.
If you include the 23s and 24s, we have 100 stages. So we're retiring 46. So yeah, it's like, yeah, people don't realize we have 100 stages and nine divisions, right? So
yeah, it's crazy.
Think about that. It's a lot of data you need. And yeah, like Billy said, a lot of the stages are very, very similar. And in fact, I don't remember which one exactly it is, but like there's like one of them, there's like two of them where like literally they're identical except for
like the start position or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know because the indoor clubs around here will run them because it's 2 stages and Fluffy's Revenge 1 and 2 or something. And
right.
So,
yeah.
All right. Well, now
and
there's now it's a turn and draw.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's still some of that, right? I mean, there's still a bunch of strong hand weak hand draw, 6 Reload 6 stuff that's in there. We haven't completely gutted the catalog, but it is obviously reduced quite a bit. To your point, Brennan, the first part of the question, how many are we adding back in? Not a solid number for that yet. You may have actually seen me. I was sitting here working on stages as you jumped into the podcast here. That's something we're working on right now. It's probably one of the next big things that'll probably be submitted in the pipeline is going to be new stages. So we'll see how many it ends up being. We'll probably be getting close. We kind of want it to be in that 50 to 60 number in terms of the active ones. So it's not going to be a ton. but we'll probably be getting back closer to that 60-ish number, adding in some more hopefully really really good stages that are more stage style like people have been asking for. We definitely want to add some back in that are definitely applicable to like indoor matches, and in the 10-round friendly states and so forth. But we also my priority anyway is I want to get a couple back in that are definitely kind of bigger, more field course style stages for the system as well. So, but we'll
Yeah.
see what ends up being selected when we get approved. Yes.
Oh, sweet. Uh, as a former MD, like that's wow. Thank you. The photos, some of them are still pictures of Legos. Literally.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's the 4 tuxes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's huge in 2 points. Number 1, like, we don't we we don't want the classifiers to be any harder to set up than they have to be, right? So, like,
Correct.
clearly defining everything, making it clear, making it simple, that's great. I think in the classifier designs that we're gonna be adding as well, like, we're specifically thinking about making it easy to set up. Like, "Hey, let's yeah, maybe I'd rather have that target like 2 feet further that way, but if I put it right here, it's lined up perfectly with the wall, and it's just like super easy to
Yes.
know exactly where it goes, right? Like great, because consistency is huge. And no matter how well like the high factors are set and so forth, like there are definitely stages in the catalog where it's like, man, if your wall is 4 inches shorter than it's supposed to be, which a lot of clubs have, like that's a big deal. And it
Yep.
changes exposures and so forth. And there's it's funny when you look at some of these diagrams, like there's certain clubs, that you can see in the data, like, hey, why are all the top runs in this classifier from the same place? And certainly, like clubs here in North Carolina have gotten in trouble for some of that, and some of that may be intentional in some cases, but in other cases, it's like, man, I can definitely see how they thought that was the way it was supposed to be, like, for sure. So, yeah, I think republishing those and clarifying those will hopefully be a big improvement as well. I think for
Cool.
sure.
I like it.
Cool. Well, I'm sure there's so much more we could go into and talk about this. We're already way longer than I expected we'd be for this conversation. And so if you're still here, we appreciate you listening and hopefully you got some good stuff out of it. For sure. Again, stay tuned to the website. There should be some announcements coming up very soon. I'll try to remember to just throw a link down in the description of this video. Check there first. I'll post it here if I can. If not, it'll be on the USP's website. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff there. The actual new adjusted stage list, the high hit factors list, as well as if you happen to be a math nerd, the mega doc, if you will be there. That will dive in much deeper into kind of the methodology behind how all this is happening and how it's working under the hood, if you will. So if
Cool.
you're interested in that stuff, there's no secrets. It's all pretty much out there how this is working, and so check that stuff out as well. If you have comments, questions, concerns, certainly you can drop them down below or hit up the classifier committee or our fearless leader, Mr. Alex Acosta A4. His contact information is on the website as well, or you can use the classifier email address on the USPSA website as well. We would love to hear from you. Again, a lot of the changes that are happening, are coming straight from what we hear from the membership. Brennan and I, travel around the country and work with new shooters every single week. And I'm sure you're like me, man. You hear the comments that people are looking for on the system all the time.
Oh yeah.
And all that's very helpful. And it has gone directly into the kind of the priority list and some of the things that we're doing on the committee. So I think that's about it, guys. You got any last big things you want to slip in? Cool.
I'm just excited to watch how this really changes people's perspective of matches and how they approach it and the skill development piece. Like, I think that's going to be really, really cool to watch. I think the people who are doing it, who are doing USPSA the best right now, it's not going to change a lot for them, which is really cool, right? I have not always been training this way or shooting this way, but when I heard about all these changes, I was like, cool, I'm happy with that. But like 2 years ago, I probably would have been a little bit upset. So if it upsets you, like, maybe take a look into the way you're training or what your goals are and things like that. And just focus on
get
consistency.
good, dude.
Get more
Let's
better
be
at
honest.
at shooting, and yeah, you'll have an easier time with it. So I like
sure.
it. I dig it. And I know it's a lot of
Cool.
work that you guys have been putting in. So very, very cool.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.